The man I loved had a secret name for me. On the internet, for an audience of cheering men, I was not Alara. I was the resource. You just have to remember you're not dealing with a rational agent, he'd written under the username Dominus Rex, dissecting our fight from the night before. You're managing a resource. The full post was a monument to a familiar pain, twisted into a victory lap. Had to deploy the hysteria protocol again last night, it began. Subject E became agitated over a minor scheduling conflict. Standard female irrationality. She started bringing up past grievances, trying to weaponize emotion, so I followed the playbook. Step 1, disengage from the emotional content. Step 2, reframe her outburst as a symptom of her inherent instability. Step 3, express concern for her mental state. By the end, she was apologizing to me for being too sensitive. It's remarkable how effective these techniques are. Subject E. That was her. Ilara. The scheduling conflict had been Liam canceling their anniversary dinner for the third time in a row to attend a work emergency he refused to elaborate on. Her agitation had been a plea for him to prioritize their life together. His concern had been a condescending monologue about her stress levels, suggesting she was letting her job get to her, making her unstable. And she had apologized. She had actually thanked him for being so patient with her. The post was a case study in contempt, written for an audience of cheering, like-minded men. The comments were a cascade of agreement. Classic female emotional manipulation, one wrote. Well played, Dominus. Keep her in check. Another added, the playbook never fails. They are fundamentally simple creatures. This was not just an angry rant. It was a strategy, a methodology. Dominus Rex, her Liam, was not just venting. He was teaching. He was a respected member of this community, an influencer in a world built on a foundation of pure, distilled misogyny. Their marriage, her life, was a laboratory for his theories. She wasn't his partner. She was Subject E, a resource to be managed, an object to be controlled. The entire architecture of their 3-year marriage, the life she believed they had built on love and mutual respect, was revealed to be a unilateral construction of deceit. The man she loved did not exist. In his place was a stranger who held her in complete and utter contempt, a man who saw their life together as a game he was expertly winning. But how did we get here? Let's start from the beginning. 3 years ago, Alara's life had felt like a perfectly executed design project. At 26, she was a rising graphic designer at a competitive firm, and she had just met Liam, a software developer whose quiet confidence was a counterpoint to her own creative intensity. He was 30, established, and seemed to possess a clarity of purpose that she found compelling. Their courtship was a model of modern romance. They talked for hours about their ambitions, their shared values, their desire for a stable, equitable partnership. Liam was a vocal proponent of equality. He spoke with disapproval of the gender dynamics at his tech company, championing the female colleagues he felt were overlooked. He listened to Alara's workplace frustrations, offering what seemed like insightful, supportive advice. "You're the most capable person I know," he'd tell her. "Don't let them diminish you." He was, in every apparent way, the perfect partner. They married on a clear day, surrounded by friends and family, both convinced they were embarking on a life of shared dreams. The first year was idyllic. They settled into a comfortable routine, a seamless blend of their two lives. The red flags, when they appeared, were so small, so subtle, that they were not flags at all, merely threads of a slightly different color, easily overlooked in the grand tapestry of their happiness. The first thread appeared about 8 months into the marriage. Alara was up for a major promotion, a senior designer role she had been working toward for years. She was excited and nervous, spending her evenings refining her portfolio. One night, she was talking through her presentation with Liam, full of energy. "And this campaign," she said, pointing to a concept she was particularly proud of, "is projected to increase user engagement by 30%. Liam looked at it, his expression unreadable. "It's good," he said. "But is it worth the stress? You've been so tense lately. The hours you're putting in. I worry about you." Alara was taken aback. "It's a lot of work, but it's worth it. This is a huge step for me." "Of course," he said, his tone placating. "I just think about the bigger picture. A role like that, it's all-consuming. More travel, more late nights. We've built such a good life here. I'd hate to see it disrupted. He framed it as concern for her. For them, it seemed loving, but the underlying message was one of discouragement. He wasn't questioning her ability, but her ambition itself, suggesting it was a threat to their domestic harmony. She ended up getting the promotion, but a sliver of guilt lodged itself in her mind. Was she being selfish? Was she prioritizing work over their relationship? His words had reframed her success as a potential problem. Another thread appeared in his interactions with her friends. Her best friend Chloe was sharp, witty, and fiercely independent. Alara had always valued her perspective. After a dinner with Chloe, Liam made a comment. "Chloe's a lot," he said, as they were getting ready for bed. "What do you mean?" Alara asked. "She's just very aggressive, the way she talks about men, her career. It's a bit much. I'm just not sure she's a positive influence, that's all. She seems to make you more anxious." He never told her not to see Chloe. That would have been too obvious. Instead, he planted a seed of doubt. He would sigh with exaggerated patience when Alara was on the phone with her. He would find reasons to be busy whenever Chloe was supposed to come over. Slowly, imperceptibly, a wedge was driven. Alara began to second-guess her conversations with her friend, wondering if Liam was right. Was Chloe too negative? Did she make Alara anxious? The visits became less frequent. The most insidious tactic, however, was what she would later learn the forum called emotional invalidation. Her feelings, especially her negative ones, were systematically recategorized as irrational overreactions. An instance of him forgetting a promise was not a valid reason for her to be upset. It was an opportunity for him to express disappointment in her for getting worked up over nothing. If she felt ignored when he spent an entire evening on his phone, the problem wasn't his behavior, but her neediness. "Alara, you have to be more resilient," he would say, his voice calm and reasonable. "The world doesn't revolve around you. I have pressures you can't understand. You need to be able to manage your own emotions without making it my problem." He was the stoic, logical man, and she was the volatile, emotional woman. He created a dynamic where his emotional state was the default, the baseline of normalcy, and hers was a deviation that needed to be corrected. Over time, it worked. She began to believe it. She started policing her own feelings, judging them before she even expressed them. Is this a valid reason to be upset? Am I overreacting? Am I being too sensitive? She started apologizing for having feelings at all. This was their life. A seemingly perfect partnership on the surface, but underneath, a quiet, systematic erosion of her self-worth was underway. Liam grew more distant, more irritable, but he always had a plausible explanation. The pressure at his job was immense. He was working on a high-stakes project. He was tired. He was stressed. And she, the supportive wife, did her best to be his sanctuary, to be less demanding, less emotional, less of a burden. She didn't realize she was simply making it easier for him to implement his strategies. The discovery happened by accident. Liam had been called away on a Saturday for another work emergency. He'd left his personal laptop open on his desk, something he never did. He was meticulous about his digital privacy. Alara was tidying up his office, a space she rarely entered, and saw the screen. He'd been logged into a web forum, a simple, text-based interface. The name of the forum was The Red Pill Axiom. Curiosity got the better of her. She thought it might be a political or philosophical group. She glanced at the screen. The post at the top of the page was titled, Field Report, Successful Frame Control. She read a few lines, a story about a man manipulating his girlfriend into quitting her job. It was distasteful, but she thought it was just online bravado. Then she saw the username, Dominus Rex. It meant master and king in Latin. It sounded like something Liam, a former classics minor, would choose. A strange feeling, not yet alarm but a definite unease, prompted her to type the username into the forum's search bar. The result was a list of thousands of posts stretching back over 5 years, long before he had even met her. She clicked on the first one. It was an introductory post. New member here, it read. Name's Dominus Rex. I'm 27, working in tech. I've come to realize that everything society has taught me about women is a lie designed to disempower men. I'm here to learn the truth and reclaim my natural authority. She felt a jolt. This was him, the age, the profession, the tone of intellectual superiority. It was him. She started reading, her initial curiosity shifting into a profound sense of dread. She scrolled through years of his life, his thoughts, his ideology. It was a complete philosophy of misogyny, dressed up in pseudo-intellectual jargon. Women were hypergamous, always seeking to trade up for a higher status male. They were incapable of logic, ruled by fleeting emotions or solipsism. They were not to be treated as equals, but as assets to be acquired and managed through a set of techniques: dread game, frame control, gaslighting. She spent the next hour frozen in his desk chair, a spectator to the secret life of her own husband. She read his posts about his dating life before he met her, where he detailed his strategies for manipulating women. Then she reached the posts from the last 3 years. He had been documenting their entire relationship. He wrote about their first date. Met a new target, high value, but naive. Believes in all the feminist nonsense, a blank slate, perfect for long-term project. He wrote about his proposal. Locked it down. The investment phase is over. Now begins the maintenance phase. Time to slowly dial back the validation and begin implementing frame control. He wrote about their arguments, their vacations, their intimate moments, all filtered through the grotesque lens of his ideology. Every memory she cherished was there, reframed as a tactical victory for him. The time he'd encouraged her to take a less demanding job wasn't about her well-being. It was, as he wrote, about limiting her independence and making her more reliant on my frame. The way he'd isolated her from Chloe was a textbook example of cutting off negative influences and controlling her social circle. She felt a wave of intellectual vertigo. Her reality, the very foundation of her life for the past 3 years, was disintegrating. The man she shared a bed with, the man she had promised to love and honor, was a complete stranger. He was a performer, and their marriage was his stage. His love was not love, it was a tactic. His support was not support, it was a means of control. That night, when he came home, she pretended to be asleep. She couldn't look at him. She lay there, her mind racing, replaying every moment of their life together. But this time, she had the playbook. She could see the strings. The next day, she called in sick to work. She knew Liam would be gone from 9 to 6, a predictable schedule that she now understood was part of his control, creating a stable environment for his project. As soon as he left, she returned to the laptop. His session was still active. She needed more. She needed to understand the full scope of the deception. She spent the entire day reading. It was a journey into the heart of a deeply sick ideology, but more than that, it was a guided tour of her own life, narrated by her captor. She found the forum's playbook, a series of guides and manifestos that laid out the entire strategy. The guide to gaslighting. The goal is to make her doubt her own perceptions, contradict her memory of events, tell her she's misremembering or being too sensitive. If she says you hurt her feelings, the correct response is not to apologize, but to question the validity of the feelings themselves. Over time, she will lose trust in her own mind and will rely on you to define reality for her. Alara's mind flashed to a dozen different moments. There was the time she was sure he had promised to pick up her parents from the airport. When he forgot, and she was upset, he looked at her with genuine seeming confusion. "Honey, I never said that. You must have imagined it. You've been under so much pressure at work. You're getting forgetful." He was so convincing that she had ended up believing him, chastising herself for her faulty memory. She had apologized to him for getting angry. Now, reading the guide, she saw it wasn't a simple mistake. It was a deliberate, calculated technique to undermine her sanity. The guide to isolation. A woman's power often comes from her social support network. This must be neutralized. Identify the friends and family members who give her the most validation and slowly poison the well. Never forbid her from seeing them. Instead, frame them as negative influences. Complain that her loud friend gives you a headache or that her mother is too critical. Make being with them an unpleasant experience for you, which in turn creates social friction for her. Eventually, she will choose the path of least resistance, which is to spend less time with them and more time within your frame. She saw his entire campaign against Chloe laid bare. It wasn't a personal dislike. It was a strategic maneuver. He had done the same with her brother, constantly referring to him as irresponsible and a bad influence, until Alara found herself making excuses not to attend family gatherings. He had systematically dismantled her support system, leaving him as her primary source of validation and social interaction. She had thought she was making choices to keep the peace in her marriage. In reality, she was being corralled. The Guide to Financial Control. Encourage a joint bank account as a sign of trust and partnership. Once finances are merged, begin to scrutinize her spending. Frame your control as financial responsibility. Make her feel guilty for small purchases. Question her judgment on larger ones. The goal is to make her feel like she needs your permission to use what is ostensibly shared money. This creates a powerful dependency. This hit her hard. They had merged their finances a year ago, an act she had seen as the ultimate symbol of their union. Since then, a subtle tension had entered their discussions about money. Her desire to buy a new piece of design software was met with a lecture on their budget. His purchase of a new, expensive piece of tech was a necessary investment. She had to justify her spending while he simply announced his. She had felt like a child asking for an allowance, a feeling she had dismissed as her own financial anxiety. It wasn't. It was a manufactured dependency, straight from the playbook. With every post she read, every guide she absorbed, the last 3 years of her life rearranged themselves into a new, horrifying mosaic. The loving husband was gone, replaced by Dominus Rex, the master manipulator. The happy marriage was gone, replaced by a long-term psychological experiment. The person she thought she was, a strong, independent woman in an equal partnership, was a fiction. She was Subject E, a case study in successful subjugation. The most chilling realization was how effective it had been. She had been so sure of her own mind, her own strength, yet she had been led step by step into a cage she hadn't even seen. His methods were insidious because they preyed on her best qualities, her empathy, her desire for harmony, her willingness to give the person she loved the benefit of the doubt. He had weaponized her love against her. She read about other men on the forum, men who were doing the same thing to their wives and girlfriends. They shared tips, celebrated their wins, and dehumanized the women in their lives with a chilling camaraderie. They were a brotherhood, united by a shared contempt and a shared methodology of control. This wasn't just about Liam. It was about an entire subculture of men who had chosen to see women as adversaries in a secret war. By the time the sun began to set, casting long shadows across the room, Alara was no longer the same person who had woken up that morning. The grief was immense, a vast, empty space where her love for Liam used to be. But underneath the grief, something else was taking root, a cold, hard anger. It was the anger of the deceived, the fury of the underestimated. He had mistaken her kindness for weakness. He had mistaken her love for stupidity. He thought he was managing an irrational resource. He had no idea what a rational, determined woman, armed with the truth, was capable of. She closed the laptop. The shock had passed. The grief was a wound she would have to tend to later. Now, there was only one thought in her mind: escape. But she couldn't just leave. A man who had spent years constructing a cage would not simply let her walk out the door. He would use every tool in his arsenal to stop her. Gaslighting, manipulation, feigned remorse, threats. He would try to make her believe she was crazy, that she was destroying their perfect life over a misunderstanding. She knew she had to be smarter than him. She had to use his own playbook against him. He saw the world as a series of strategic moves, a game of power and control. Fine. She would play the game, but she would play to win. Her first move was to erase her tracks. She cleared the browser history on his laptop, logged out of the forum, and put everything in his office back exactly as it was. He could never know that she knew, not yet. Her ignorance was her most powerful weapon. It would allow her to observe, to plan, to gather what she needed without tipping him off. When Liam came home that evening, she greeted him with a practiced smile. It was the most difficult performance of her life. "How was your day?" she asked, her voice even. "Long," he said, dropping his keys into the bowl by the door. "Stressful. You have no idea." "I'm sorry to hear that," she said. And for the first time, she saw him not as her beleaguered husband, but as Dominus Rex, the manipulator. She saw the condescension in his eyes, the subtle dismissal in his tone. It was all there, clear as day, now that she knew what to look for. "Why don't you relax? I'll handle dinner." "Thanks, E," he said, already retreating into his phone. "You're the best." The words, once a comfort, were now a confirmation. She was Subject E, the compliant resource. For the next week, Alara lived a double life. Outwardly, she was the perfect, supportive wife. She was more agreeable, less demanding. She didn't initiate any difficult conversations. She let his comments slide. She played the part of the woman he had molded her to be. He seemed to relax, becoming more confident in his control. He even posted about it on the forum, a fact Alara confirmed by checking the site on her own phone, using a private browser. Subject E has been remarkably compliant lately, Dominusek Rex wrote. I think the last Hysteria protocol was a major success. It's reinforced the frame. A little bit of consistent pressure and they just fall into line. It's a beautiful thing. Inwardly, she was a strategist preparing for battle. She began to quietly disentangle her life from his. She opened a new bank account at a different bank, siphoning off a portion of her paycheck into it. She told Liam it was a new company policy for direct deposits. A lie he accepted without question. Too absorbed in his own world to notice the details of hers. She reconnected with Chloe. She called her one afternoon, her voice trembling slightly. "I need to see you," she said. "I've made a mistake. I've been a terrible friend." Chloe, without asking for an explanation, just said, when and where. They met at a coffee shop far from Alara's neighborhood. The moment she saw her friend, Alara's composure broke. She told her everything. She told her about the forum, about Dominus Rex, about Subject E. She told her about the gaslighting, the isolation, the slow, methodical destruction of her sense of self. Chloe listened, her expression hardening with every word. She didn't say, "I told you so." She didn't criticize Alara for not seeing it sooner. When Alara was finished, Chloe reached across the table and took her hand. "Okay," Chloe said, her voice firm. "Here's what we're going to do." Chloe became her logistical commander. She helped Alara find a new apartment, a small place in a neighborhood Liam would never think to look. They signed the lease using Alara's new bank account. They planned the escape for a Thursday, a day when Liam had a standing late-night meeting. The plan was simple. While he was at his meeting, Chloe and her brother would come over with a moving van. They would take only what was essential and undeniably hers: her clothes, her books, her computer, her design equipment. They would leave behind everything that was part of their shared life, all the furniture and art they had picked out together. She wanted nothing that had been purchased during the Great Deception. She wanted a clean break. The final piece of her plan was the confrontation. She debated this for days. Part of her wanted to just disappear, to leave a note and be done with it. But she knew she couldn't. For her own sake, for her own healing, she needed to face him. She needed to reclaim her own reality, out loud, to his face. She couldn't let his version of events be the final word. She had to dismantle his frame, once and for all. And she knew exactly how she would do it. The day of the escape arrived. Alara moved through the hours in a state of heightened awareness. Every interaction with Liam was freighted with meaning. She made him his favorite breakfast. He barely looked up from his phone. She asked about his day. He gave a one-word answer. He was completely oblivious, cocooned in his arrogance. He saw her as a solved problem, a tamed creature. That evening, he left for his meeting at 7:30. "Don't wait up," he said, kissing her on the forehead. It was a gesture of ownership, not affection. The moment his car pulled out of the driveway, Alara sent a text to Chloe. "Go." 20 minutes later, the moving van arrived. For the next 2 hours, they worked in a quiet, efficient fury. They packed boxes, carried furniture, and stripped the house of every trace of Alara's presence. By 9:30, the van was loaded. Her old life was packed into a 10 by 15-foot space. Chloe gave her a hug. "Are you sure you want to do this alone?" "I have to," Alara said. "This part is just for me." Chloe nodded, her eyes full of understanding. "Call me the second you're out." Alara walked back into the half-empty house. It was an echo chamber of their shared life. She walked into his office and sat down at his desk. She opened his laptop, logged into the Red Pill Axiom, and pulled up his profile page. Then, she waited. He came home just after 10. He walked in, calling her name. "Alara?" He saw the empty spaces in the living room, the bare walls where their pictures used to hang. A look of confusion crossed his face. "What's going on? Did we get robbed?" No, she said, her voice coming from the office. We didn't get robbed. He walked to the office doorway and saw her sitting at his desk, his laptop open in front of her. His confusion curdled into alarm. He saw the screen. He saw his own profile page, his username, his post history. The mask fell. For a split second, she saw a flicker of pure panic in his eyes. It was the look of a king whose castle had just been stormed. "What is this?" he said, his voice attempting to find its usual tone of authority and failing. "What are you doing on my computer?" Alara didn't answer. She simply turned the laptop so he could see it more clearly. She had a specific post open. It was the one about Subject E and the hysteria protocol. "I believe the term is frame control," Alara said, her voice devoid of the emotion he was expecting. It was not hysterical. It was not angry. It was the voice of a scientist stating a fact. "This is the part where you tell me I'm being irrational, that I'm misinterpreting things, that I'm being too sensitive." Liam stared at her, his mind clearly racing, trying to find the right strategy, the right script to run. "Alara, it's not what it looks like. It's a kind of thought experiment. A role-playing game." "A role-playing game?" Alara repeated, her tone one of mild, intellectual curiosity. "So, when you wrote, 'The goal is to make her doubt her own perceptions,' that was just part of the game? When you systematically alienated me from my friends, as advised in your guide to isolation, that was just for fun? When you called me Subject E, a resource to be managed, was that you just getting into character? Dominus Rex?" She said the username out loud. He flinched as if struck. Hearing it in her voice, in their home, was a violation of the barrier between his two worlds. "You don't understand," he stammered, falling back on his default defense. "The pressures I'm under. The world is hostile to men. This is just a place for men to talk." "I've read your talk," Alara said calmly. "I've read all of it. 5 years of it. I read about your target, the naive girl who believed in feminist nonsense. I read about your maintenance phase after you locked it down. I read about every strategy, every manipulation, every piece of contempt you've ever felt for me and for every other woman you've ever met." She stood up, moving from behind the desk. She was no longer on his territory. "The thing you and your friends don't seem to understand is that women are not a different species. We are not simple creatures that can be managed with a playbook. We are rational agents. And when you treat a rational agent with nothing but contempt and deceit, eventually, they will see you for what you are." His face was a storm of emotions. The panic was giving way to a desperate, sputtering anger. This was not in the playbook. The subject was not supposed to be able to deconstruct the experiment. "You're throwing away our life," he said, his voice rising. 3 years. You're just going to throw it all away because you found some stupid website?" "Our life?" Alara asked. "There was no our life. There was your project, and I was your lab rat. But the experiment is over, and the results are in. I am not the person you thought I was. You never even knew me. You were too busy managing me to ever actually see me." She walked past him toward the front door. Her car keys were in her hand. "Where are you going?" he demanded, following her. "You can't just leave." "I can," she said, turning to face him one last time. "You see, the flaw in your philosophy is that it assumes your control is absolute. It's not. It's an illusion. And it only works as long as the other person doesn't know the rules of the game. But I know the rules now, and I'm not playing anymore." He looked at her, truly looked at her, and for the first time, she saw that he had no idea who he was looking at. He was not seeing Alara, his wife. He was seeing a catastrophic failure in his system, a variable he had never accounted for. He saw a rational agent who had made a decision. She opened the front door and walked out into the night, not looking back. She got into her car and drove away from the house, from the man who wasn't a man but a methodology, from the life that wasn't a life but a carefully constructed lie. The drive to her new apartment was a blur. It was only when she was standing in the empty living room, the key in her hand, that the full weight of it all descended. She had done it. She had escaped. The weeks that followed were a quiet storm. There were practicalities to deal with. Lawyers, divorce papers, the formal dismantling of a life. Liam tried to contact her, sending a barrage of texts and emails that cycled through all the stages of his playbook: feigned remorse, gaslighting, anger, threats, and finally, a pathetic plea. She read none of them. She blocked his number and set up a filter to send his emails directly to a folder she never opened. Her lawyer handled all communication. He was a problem to be managed, and she was delegating. The true work was internal. It was the process of rebuilding her own reality, of learning to trust her own perceptions again. For 3 years, her mind had been a hostile territory, colonized by his definitions, his frames, his reality. Now, she had to reclaim it, inch by painful inch. She went back through her memories, this time with the clarity of truth. She remembered every instance of his manipulation, not with the pain of a victim, but with the analytical eye of a survivor. She saw his tactics for what they were, and in doing so, she disarmed them. They no longer had power over her. She spent more time with Chloe, with her family. She let their love and their belief in her be the scaffolding around which she rebuilt her sense of self. They had never seen her as Subject E. They had always seen her as a Lara. She just had to learn to see herself that way again. Healing was not a straight line. There were days of profound sadness, a grief for the man she thought she had married, for the future she thought they would have. The love she had felt was real, even if it was built on a foundation of lies. She had to mourn that. There were days of anger, a white-hot rage at the sheer, calculated cruelty of his deception. And there were days of doubt, a lingering echo of his voice in her head, questioning her, undermining her. But slowly, gradually, a new feeling began to emerge, a sense of peace. It was the peace of authenticity, of living a life that was her own, governed by her own thoughts, her own feelings, her own values. She had walked through the heart of a profound deception and had come out the other side, not unscathed, but whole. One evening, months later, she was in her new apartment, working on a freelance design project. The work was challenging and fulfilling. Her space was small, but it was hers. Every object in it was something she had chosen. She was listening to music she loved, music Liam had always dismissed as unserious. She felt a sense of quiet contentment that was deeper and more real than any of the manufactured happiness of her marriage. She had survived Dominus Rex. She had deconstructed his theories and broken free from his control. She knew the road ahead was long. The scars from his psychological warfare would take time to fade. But she was no longer Subject E. She was a Lara. And for the first time in a very long time, she was free.